Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Sisters Assemble, and we are continuing our coverage of the Marvels today and breaking out some of those important topics that we just didn't get to dive into deeply enough in our initial reactions episode. So if you saw the title of this episode, you know that we are diving deep into the multiversal implications today, which may end up being a good episode. It could end up being my least favorite episode of all. Who knows? But it's going to be interesting, to say the least, because there's a lot to talk about coming out of this film, which I don't know that we necessarily knew going into it. So that's really exciting. And I know Katie and I are really ready to dive in, talk about it, and give you guys some good background going into whatever is the next multiversal property, because honestly, who knows at this point. But without further ado, I'm going to let Katie kick it off and talk a little bit about her top topics around the multiverse.
When I was thinking about this, I kind of broke it down to two things. And obviously they're related. You can't really talk about them without them being related. But coming out of the Marvels, there's two ways for you to kind of look at the multiversal implications, or the big topics that cause big implications. The first being, obviously, we saw the quantum bands being used for the first time. Well, together for the first time together. But we also saw one being used for the first time to create holes in space. And then when they were used together, they created a hole in the universe. So that is one way to look at it. That is one front that I think we need to take at, and then talk about the quantum bands as a whole as well. The other side of it is from the end credit scene, where essentially even Beast sat there and said, "You should not be here. You should not have been able to do what you just did and come from another universe and be here right now." So there's a lot on that statement as far as I'm concerned. So, I mean, T, you could take your pick on which one you want to start with and what alley you want to go down first, and we'll wrap up with the second one.
You know, I think coming off of our episode last week where we talked all about the end credits scene and specifically split out this section about the multiverse, and we really focused on the X-Men last episode, let's continue that conversation, but then focus on kind of the second part of that end credit. You know, you hit the nail on the head. Beast said, "How did you get here? It literally should not be possible." And, you know, in case you guys don't know, Beast is incredibly intelligent, right? Like, don't let the blue fur confuse you. If you're not an X-Men fan, or you didn't watch any of the movies, or you don't read the comics, Beast is a very intelligent being. So if anybody can figure this out, he would be one of them. So for him to be kind of stumped by this is definitely telling that things are going on that some of the brightest minds in the universe are really having trouble understanding. And I mean, think about Monica too. I mean, Monica didn't have all of the information that Beast had at the time, but she looked certainly very confused, and we saw how brilliant she is. So you're looking at two very intelligent people who are just unable to figure this thing out. So I want to point that out because I think it's important to understand that this is treading in new territory for these characters. We have the benefit of a bird's eye view, right? We've seen all of the different properties. We've seen Loki. We've seen, WandaVision, and all of the things that have kind of, Multiverse of Madness, of course, all the things that have kind of led to this moment and given us the breadcrumbs. But these characters have only seen bits and pieces. And so I think that's also important to understand, is like they are trying to figure this out just as much as we are, but actually with less information than we have, which is an interesting perspective to take.
Yeah, and I think too, you point out Beast is an extremely intelligent being. What's interesting to me is he almost isn't inherently shocked that she's from another universe. He's more so confused on how she physically got there. And I think that's kind of what I want to focus on with his statement, because again, it proves to us that other universes are well aware of a multiverse existing. 838, they knew. They literally were labeling people. Like, that's how we were told we were 616, was because they sat there and they said, "You're 616 in our whole catalog of, universes we know of." So again, another universe is aware of the multiverse. I don't really want to understand how everybody's aware of the multiverse if it just opened. Physically, that is something I'm not sure we're ever going to get the answer to. And if Marvel's going to gloss over it, I'm happy to gloss over it. And we all know I'm happy to gloss over that. But the bigger thing is, again, he doesn't understand how she got there, which means we are not yet technically supposed to be seeing people travel between the universes. But to him, Monica, at least to their knowledge, obviously there could be people showing up that maybe the X-Men aren't aware of. But to them, Monica is the first one that has come from another universe and is now in theirs.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. It makes me wonder why 616 seems to be sort of behind the curve a little bit. I mean, 838 was clearly more advanced than we were. And just as an aside, I think we said this in the initial reactions episode. To us, this new X-Men set that we got, I think we mentioned it last episode too. This is not 838. This is a completely separate universe. It doesn't have a number yet. But I just want to point out that now we have entered brand new territory in terms of a new universe that we have not yet explored. Granted, we've spent a whole of 2 minutes there, but now we can add that to kind of our catalog. But going back to what you were saying, 838, they knew about the multiverse. Beast, to your point, doesn't seem surprised. So they clearly have a little bit more advanced knowledge of the multiverse. It's really only our folks that are like, the multiverse? What? Ancient One aside. But most people are very confused by it, right? Even Strange, I feel like, in Multiverse of Madness, didn't really grasp the whole concept until he was taught it in the film, if I'm remembering correctly, because I don't make it a point to rewatch that film that often. But I just feel like 616, our universe, is a little bit flying blind in comparison to these other universes who, to what we've seen, have had the time to kind of wrap their brains around it and figure out, like, makes sense, doesn't make sense. I get the multiverse, I don't get the logistics. Like, that's still leaps and bounds ahead of where we are.
Yeah, I can only say that I think my thought process is, remember that we're supposed to be the sacred timeline. And so, and again, we are going to leave Loki and the ending of Loki season 2 as far out of this as humanly possible, because until we can explain half of what happened, it's not really that fair for us to try and put anything on a recording. But I'm thinking, we're supposed to be the sacred timeline. Anything that creates a new timeline isn't a small change like, oh, I was running late today and I didn't eat breakfast. And so I left 15 minutes late. And instead of, getting in a car accident that I was supposed to get into, I missed it. Like that's a minor change on a timeline versus like when Loki took the Tesseract at the end of, well, it was during Endgame, but it would have been at the end of the first Avengers movie and teleported out of there instead of going to the Dark World or going back to Asgard for the Dark World with Thor and following the regular sacred timeline act of events, right? That's a big change. So I'm assuming all branches happen when huge changes, momentous changes happen. Well, maybe we just went to two universes where the changes were, huge in the sense of these people are more technologically advanced, or, in this case, there's a whole X-Men that we don't have at all. These are things that they could have been big changes. And that's what I'm trying to, I guess, advocate for, is the thinking in that way.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think I want to put one nuance on what you were saying. I think from what we saw in Loki, a small change can create a branch, but I don't think those are the branches we're visiting, right? I think we're only going to see the big change ones because those are the only ones that are really going to be visually and narratively interesting. So I just want to make that quick clarification. But then I do want to kind of go off of what you were saying and also add in something that we've talked about before, which is it's entirely possible we're not just switching universes, but also time in universes. Because remember, very specifically in the film, they said that dar-benn blew a hole in space time.
Yeah.
Which means it's possible that Monica not only went to whatever Earth that is, but also then went 10 years in the future. Like, even though Maria was there and Maria was young, maybe that timeline is different. Maybe Maria was born in a different year. Maybe there's a whole lot of things that could happen, literally an infinite amount of possibilities there. So that's why I almost wonder, like, if that's another answer. I think 838 seemed to be
very futuristic.
Yeah, to the point where it's entirely possible that was also in the future. So, I think that's another opportunity. I did just want to point out that whole thing with 616 and why we seem to be a little bit on the back foot in comparison to a lot of these other universes. But I think between, the subtle changes and the different minds that they have, working on these problems, you have Professor X, who's a genius, you have Beast, who's a genius, all these people, Reed Richards, who don't necessarily exist in our universe right now, working through these problems, noticing subtle changes and patterns that Tony Stark, who's focused on something else in our universe, equally as brilliant. I don't want to shade Tony on his brilliance, but may not be focused on, you know? So between the large changes and the potential for also moving forward in time as you're moving across universes, I think that is probably the best bet for why we are so far behind in comparison to everyone else.
Well, and I think you actually brought up a really interesting point in saying if you look, and now granted, we've only really explored what? No, I don't even, I think the word explore is not even right. But I think we've seen for more than 30 seconds, what, two, three universes? And one of them was destroyed already because that version's Doctor Strange went haywire and, destroyed it. So if we really look at the two we've seen, the biggest difference is they have the X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
We know the X-Men are in those universes. So, I'm not saying that's necessarily the answer, but that is the common denominator.
But that also kind of makes me wonder if that's why they're further along in time, because we have two confirmed mutants. We have Kamala and we have Namor. And so between the two of them, we've only got two. We are nowhere near an actual formed X-Men team. We don't have a Professor X. We don't have an Xavier Academy for gifted children. None of that apparatus exists for us. So it almost makes me wonder, are these universes something that we could be aspiring to in 10, 15 years as we start to see more mutants pop up, right? We started to see maybe some hints at mutants in She-Hulk too, people with powers. Where did they get them? So, unfortunately, that hasn't really been visited since then. I wish they would, put that in different places, just small things, because I want to start seeing the groundswell of mutants that would then kind of indicate that we're moving into a more mutant focused, or at least a mutant present world where we have them in there, which would then potentially lead to the formation of the X-Men by necessity.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. And I actually think I might have been the one who brought up forever ago the idea of we're not just moving through universes, we could be moving through time. Yeah, because I threw out the whole XY axis and I felt really smart. And that was a great episode
math.
for that. Yeah, that was good. But yeah, I mean, I like the idea of marrying that in there. And that being able to explain, the mutants do catapult us also further into the future, and both because of who they are, but also just quite literally, they are the future. And so I like that idea. I think that kind of helps explain some of these different universes being so much further than we are. But back to what Beast said, I mean, we've seen that they don't have this inner universal travel down yet. This isn't a thing that just happens all the time. And so, I mean, I guess, this whole idea is, or this whole episode's idea is, what are the implications to the multiverse? Well, we're going to start seeing people traveling between. Monica's not the first to do it, but she might be the first in that universe. But look at even what's been happening in ours. Clea showed up.
Well, I want to let's do this because there are other people, and I want to talk about the people who can move freely between universes, because I can think off the top of my head of four. We got whoever holds the quantum bands, which could be a combo of Kamala, Carol, or Carol and Kamala, depending on who's holding what.
I want to table anything quantum bands because I have something to say about that, but yes.
Yeah, we'll go into that more in the second section, but that is whoever holds them can literally rip a hole in space-time like we saw dar-benn do.
Yes.
And travel between universes. Next, we've got, to your point, Clea. Let's not forget our good friend America Chavez, who can do so and is learning to do so at will. And last but not least, Loki, who can do so through his time slipping. So we now have four beings, unless I'm forgetting anybody, but I think that's it. Four beings who can pretty much willingly move through the universe. Now, we don't have, or the universes to be more specific. Now, we don't have people creating wormholes yet, other than the creator of, or the carrier of the negabands. We don't have people creating wormholes. It's not a free-for-all quite yet. Oh, that's, what's one other good thing? Good example that we haven't, it's not one person, but it's kind of a mess. Everything that happened in No Way Home.
Well, that's what I was thinking of when I was bringing it up, was I was thinking of No Way Home.
Yeah, so basically a magician could really heck some things up.
Well, look at what a witch did.
So then we have to look at the magic users too.
Well, because when you were going through your list, I was like, I know she doesn't do it like physically, but I was like, that was the whole idea of MOM was Wanda.
Right. And I mean, we watched Strange do it too. So I would add to the list magic users of questionable ethics.
Well, and that could kind of be Clea. That's kind of the department Clea walks in.
Sort of. Yeah. But she's like specific. Like she's we literally watched her do it like with a knife. Like whatever she does.
Well, right. But she's also supposed to be from the dark dimension. And that's already like a gray area because the dark dimension's, well, dark and not good. So I feel like that's a little bit, but she kind of does more so fall into the magic users.
Yes, she does fall into our magical users of questionable ethics category,
Yeah.
but I wanted to name her specifically because we actually watched her do it with her physical body, not dream walking. Then we had Strange. Now that I'm thinking about this, we had Strange do it, not to his own body, but to other people through the spell that he did. Again, a magical user of questionable ethics. So outside of that category and the 4 other people we mentioned, I think that's it. But still, it's not a free-for-all.
Well, and we had Vulture.
Oh my God,
And listen,
I can't.
take it with a grain of salt, guys. But we had Vulture in Morbius. I almost said Mobius. In Morbius.
I can't with the Sonyverse.
I know, but like that's something to take it. You want to talk about No Way Home? That's something we got to consider. So we have seen it happen. Like how Monica has turned up into another universe. We have seen it happen before, just not the one that we are currently in with the X-Men.
Right. My whole point in saying this, even though we keep finding examples, is it's not like people are saying, I want to go to X universe, and they have the opportunity to like hop in a spaceship or find a magical, whatever, find a magical user and say like, can you take me to this person? The only person who can do that, there's only one who can, 2, 3.
Girl.
There's only 3 people who can truly do that, and that's America, Clea, and Loki. Because I don't think the quantum band user is going to be able to control what universe you go to. So unless you're buddies with one of those 3 peeps, there's not an apparatus, there's not an infrastructure for moving between the universes at this juncture. And that was kind of my point, even though we got a little sidetracked there, is that we're not quite at willy-nilly stage. Will we get to willy-nilly stage? Probably. I mean, there's a whole, Kang Dynasty maybe, and Secret Wars is a lot of incursions, so that's not really willy-nilly, but I do think that we're seeing more and more people move. Maybe we'll get to a willy-nilly stage, and we're going to see lots of people coming from different things. As we talked about, we're now playing around with 3 or 4 different universes, just with the X-Men alone. That's another thing to think about. So I'm going to get off my little soapbox, but that's what my point was.
Well, and I think that in itself is just the bigger implications of what we saw at the end of that end credit, and what Beast was saying was essentially, to sum it all up, is it's not happening everywhere. We're not seeing people pop up places they're not supposed to be at random all the time just because they thought about it and suddenly popped up into another universe. We aren't seeing that yet. We aren't seeing it in 616. We've had incidences. They've been isolated, but we aren't seeing it continuously. Whatever universe this isn't seeing it continuously. I didn't get the impression 838 was seeing it continuously, at least with people. They seem to have a system down, but like not in a weird way. And it mainly seemed because it was Doctor Strange that they were like, whoa, this is a problem.
Let me be prepared because Steven is a chaos agent.
Right, exactly. And obviously that last one with Evil Strange, we really didn't get much about how that went about. But from how he seemed to destroy his own universe, it didn't really sound like people were just popping up there either. It just seemed like he was being Stephen Strange. So essentially, that's where we're at. I think that's a good update to the multiverse, is what they gave us there. Moving into the quantum band conversation a little more heavily. The first thing I want to say to bridge this is Maria Rambeau is wearing both quantum bands in that end credit scene, which means we have somebody wearing the quantum bands in another universe, which means this is now our second set that we're clearly seeing, and she has both of them.
Okay, so I didn't catch that. That is interesting. I would hate to see what the power of 4 quantum bands could do, because 2 just ripped a hole in space-time.
Was it 2? Or was it possibly... Remember what the idea of the Marvels was. Was it possible that Maria was on the other side using her quantum bands at the time, and when both were activated, let's say, on our side, and they were used, and she was using hers, that's what helped rip the hole. It wasn't a one-sided hole.
That's entirely possible. Yeah. That it was dar-benn plus Maria that ripped a hole in space time. Because didn't they say that the quantum bands together should only be creating jump points? That's why all of dar-benn's jump points were kind of wonky, was that she only had one. She only had the power of doing one. So if you're taking that to mean, okay, cool, we need a quantum band to create a jump point, either dar-benn hecked up and accidentally created a hole in space time, not just space, or to your point, they switched or they kind of came together at the same time to create a whole. Now, the only caveat to that is my little Freudian slip there, which is they should have, if we're going against Marvel's logic, the Marvel's logic, they should have switched dar-benn and Maria Rambeau.
Yeah, but that's okay. The only thing I'll say is their powers were being directly. So obviously, the Marvels, the whole idea is that all three of them, their powers are being intertwined. I wonder if, in the sense of the Bangles or the quantum bands, whatever you want to call them, Bangles is still in my head because they aren't inherently the power. You know what I'm trying to say is they are like Thor's hammer, like Mew Mew. It accentuates it, but it's for the it's for the wearer. Like not anybody can just pick both up. We saw that with dar-benn. So I wonder if that is kind of the extra caveat there is it's like it wasn't just the powers, it was because it's the bands. The bands don't cause them to switch, but because they were the way that everything was being done and 616 hadn't had both Bangles together in we don't know how long. And we don't know how many exist out there and how many infinite universes. So it's possible just with what dar-benn was doing, and to your point, she was kind of being all wonky using only one of them at a time. Maybe that's what caused that almost to erode already I guess the universe doesn't really have corners, but like the edges of the universe up against whatever universe it already butts up against.
Yeah, that's very fair because they're more like conduits than they are power generators in and of themselves.
Yeah, like we even saw Kamala used her power without the bangle.
Yeah.
Because it may have activated it for her. And also, hey, Maria is here with the X-Men. Now we kind of see maybe this is how it was activated for her. She has the bangles, but it activated her power. It doesn't inherently give her power. She can use her power without them.
Right. Well, because going off of what if logic and the Maria that we saw in 818, she would be the Captain Marvel of that universe, whether she is the Captain Marvel because of the whole plane incident that we saw in Captain Marvel's solo intro movie, or if she is a mutant version, that is to be determined. And I'm sure we'll find that out whenever we see Monica, next. But you're right. She does inherently have her own powers that can be potentially amplified or controlled or whatever through the bangles. Okay, I can get behind that. I think that's an interesting theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one to throw out there. And like I said, doorways, right? That was the whole thing with what was it, the Space Stone? Someone had the doors open both ways. That was the whole idea. Because when they were experimenting on the Tesseract, that's how Loki appeared. I wonder if it's the same thing. And that's why, maybe a lot of universes, if they have the quantum bands, keep them separated. Maybe they purposely do that. Whatever universe Beast and all the X-Men are in that we're being introduced to is Maria's out here wearing both of them. And that's just reality for them. So I don't know. It's an interesting thought process, though, when you have these really powerful pieces of jewelry out here that can literally rip holes into another universe.
Yeah, it was giving me like inter-universal search for the Infinity Stone vibes.
Yeah.
And then I got a little PTSD and then I had to take a step back.
No, I definitely was thinking about that too as I was like putting all this together in my head. But it does check out that you need something bigger to do it, right? And we've been talking about the bangle and Shang-Chi's rings, which obviously are still not yet confirmed, but we've been talking about these jewelry pieces for forever, comparing them to the stones and how they could play a very similar part.
Yeah. Next, I just want to take a step back and give a few little tidbits on the quantum bands. I know we've kind of mentioned them in a couple of episodes, talking about the quantum realm and things like that, but I was doing a little bit of a read through today just to brush myself back up. And I thought it might be helpful to kind of go through a little bit of hot facts. We're going to rip them out and then talk about the ones that we think are super interesting. First of all, they're believed to be Kree artifacts. That makes a lot of sense. Why else would dar-benn be looking for them and know about their existence? Second of all, they're traditionally worn by what are called the protectors. Eon is this dude. He's like a cosmic being. He decides who gets them. Interestingly enough, at one point they are given to Thanos and Eros's parents as their wedding rings for their nuptials. So that's a really fun little tidbit there. Obviously, we're far past Thanos, but maybe they had a familial connection to him earlier in before he was, alive. They pull their power from the quantum zone. It is unclear to me if the quantum zone is the comics version of the quantum realm or if those are two different things, because as we've all seen with things like Marvel and Marvel, small changes mean a lot of different things in the comic. So unclear on that one. And then this last one is something I thought was interesting. One of the powers is, of course, called a quantum jump, which is a wormhole in space-time. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Because the last 5 minutes of that film happened. So just a quick hot facts on the quantum bands.
I think these are going to be an interesting thing. And as we talk about the implications of them, I almost want to say they're endless. When you rattle off a list like that, and we've seen what happened in the Marvels, these are probably our ticket to whatever we're going to see. They literally allow, whatever heroes. I mean, well, Monica knows that Kamala used both bangles to help close the hole. So I wonder if that is a piece of knowledge that she can share about how Maria could use them to open it back up.
Not to mention, if we're going through, and I kind of touched on this before, if we're going with the idea that Maria is a mutant because she's hanging out with the X-Men, they have now been held successfully by 2 mutants.
Right.
So that's interesting. And also, really, obviously, we know the X-Men are coming, but really kind of builds that case for a 616 X-Men, because now you have incredibly powerful mutants who are almost mirroring each other in 2 different universes with light-based powers and holders of the quantum bands, or at least 1 in Kamala's case, but she can hold 2.
So I have 2 thoughts. One just being is, just to throw this out here, not because it's important to necessarily this, but just because we've talked about it a lot. Anybody hoping for Inhumans, leave. Because if this is not Marvel's way of screaming that they're not happening, I mean, you have Kree artifacts that may or may not be turning is not the right word, activating mutant genes. Sorry, but it screams Inhumans aren't around the corner.
Yeah. It's like, bye, Terrigenesis.
Yeah.
We loved you for a minute.
Yeah.
But now we've got the rights to the X-Men back and you are no longer necessary.
Yeah. So I just that is just in my head. The second thing being is, this goes back a little bit to our conversation before, but I wonder if part of the reason 616 seems so behind is because we're always too careful, almost. And if you look at how a lot of incidents happen, it's because we're avoiding something. We try to keep the Infinity Stones separated because of different reasons, when maybe if we would have kept some of them together, we could have fought back against Thanos. And, there's a lot of examples, I think, of times when we're being too careful. Our heroes are being too cautious with what they do, just like at the end of the Marvels, because Kamala no longer wears both bands. They keep them separated, but we're seeing that Maria in another universe is wearing both of them for a reason, clearly. So that's something I just want to throw out there. It doesn't need to be a true fact by any means, but just a thought process that I had.
Yeah, no, it's interesting that you bring that up, because I think the perspective on 616 is, oh my God, if these ever were in the hands of a bad person, oh my God, this is going to be awful, catastrophic, end of world.
Yeah.
True. Yes, true. But they don't ever think about the flip side, which is what could happen in the hands of a good person. And I think your Infinity Stone example is really strong, because obviously we know what Thanos did with them, but then we watched what Tony did with them.
Right.
And we watched what the Hulk did with them. So they don't ever think of them as tools. They think of them almost as things to be defended against. Whereas I could see, the other universe looking at Maria and going, you're powerful as all get out. You can hold these things. Hold them, defend them, use them to defend us. These are a tool, but also now we know that someone we trust is watching over them at all times. Not that, Kamala and Carol don't trust each other, but if Kamala's on her own and she's powerful, I'm not trying to pick on her. You all know how much I love Kamala, but she's more likely to get beaten with only 1 bangle than she is with 2. So, that's the other thing is like, all right, now you're not amplifying Kamala's powers as much, or the same could go for Carol. Like, Carol's not infallible. We saw that in this movie. That was the point. And so Carol could get attacked. Maybe she's using the second bangle. She's figured out how to use a second quantum band, and her power is not amplified now, and she needs that. And she can't call for Kamala. Whereas if either one of them in that situation had both of them, they were tools to amplify, drive their powers, and make them stronger and help them beat the bad guy.
Well, and then to sit here and take what you just said and marry our two big points that we started this episode with together. If Maria has had these bands for who knows how long in the other universe, she is a good person, as you pointed out, a powerful person, and they've never ripped a hole in the universe. Meanwhile, over here, it took 5 seconds of dar-benn having them, a bad person, and we ripped a hole in our universe. So I think, to marry it all into one, we're seeing these implications because, well, one, we clearly are just stupid over here. Like, we are so overly cautious. We're like blindsided by it. And same thing happened. I mean, my God, with Civil War, and then all our heroes were separated for Infinity War. Huge plot line. But like at the end of the day, if we hadn't been the way we were, we probably would have beaten Thanos. It's just a fact. But we are just too cautious, or we act on impulse when you're seeing these other universes. I mean, look at what they did to Doctor Strange in 838. They knew what they had to do. They made the tough call. And I feel like too many times we don't. So it's interesting because I think we're getting in way over our heads when you look at some of these other universes that we might clash with. But it's also interesting because you can see they are almost like what if scenarios. What if we let Kamala keep the bangles on her and had one protector of them? And, we wouldn't be ripping holes in our universe, or at least, maybe we'd strategically rip a hole in our universe to get Maria back or something of that nature. But we won't do that because the fight always has to come to us. And so I think it's going to be interesting. I think for me, that wraps up my thought process with the multiversal implications of the Marvels. But T, confirm it for me if you're good.
Yeah, I'm good. I just want to say, I think this opened a whole lot of different avenues for conversation. I think we had been kind of looking at the multiverse one way, kind of through the lens of a Loki, and now we're able to look at it even more through the space lens than I think we were able to before. We got kind of those hints. We now know here's how space relates to the multiverse, here's how magic relates to the multiverse, and here's how the TVA and time travel. So I think we're now starting to look at it from 3 different perspectives, and I think that's going to give us a more holistic view, but also a better chance at understanding it, because having only one of the 3 or 2 of the 3 is obviously going to be limited. And now we're starting to understand it from all of its different variety of aspects and variety of perspectives, and we can kind of take those, put them together in the ways that we think fit the best. I'm not ready to do that yet, but I think we're starting to get the tools to be able to do that. And I think that's what really, really excites me about a lot of the multiversal plot lines that happen in this film.
Yeah, I agree. And I honestly just want to say this part excites me more than, the Loki part, and even more than the magic part, because I don't really understand where we're going with the incursion thing yet. When I'm looking at some of these other aspects, there just seems to be too much going on at once to be like if you would have just walked away and told me an incursion, I would have been cool. But knowing all these other aspects, I think it's overwhelming. But I get the whole, hey, this really powerful piece of weaponry can rip holes into time and space, which pushes, us into another universe. Cool. Like, this to me is something I totally understand. So I'm excited because I think this is laying the groundwork, like you said. And I'm just excited to see what comes next.
Same. And I think on that note, we're going to call it a wrap. We're going to call it an episode on our multiversal implications coming out of the Marvels. This has been really fun. I'm excited we have the time to dive deeper into these topics because, as you can see, we never would have gotten through all of them in just a reactions episode. So if you're excited to hear us talk about other deep dives in the coming weeks, definitely make sure that you are following on your podcast platform of choice and checking out the website where we have the calendar out there for you so you know what's coming up each and every week. And if you would be so kind as to want to support the show, you can check out ways to do that on our homepage if you scroll down to the bottom.
You can also give us a follow on Twitter at SisAssembledPod or Instagram and Threads at Sisters Assembled to keep up with all things relating to the show. And Taylor was mentioning we're doing another deep dive next week. We are going to be looking into some of the politics behind the Kree and Of course, the scrolls will get thrown in there, and just some of those really interesting political aspects of the Marvels that we really didn't have time to talk to on at all, really, because there was a lot that happened in that movie. If you guys haven't picked up on that yet, but make sure you guys get ready for that one. That's going to be a really interesting one, different than some of our others. So get ready, keep up with us, keep up with Marvel, because Marvel just blew your mind. So let's talk about it.